Full disclosure. Full disclosure, and I'm not just making a pun on the episode's title. I accidentally watched this episode early because the 1A, 1B setup of the first season confused me. I finished season 1A, and then in my head thought to go straight to season 2. I saw this episode, I thought it was going to be like a flash-forward season opener, and all the random contextless shots would get explained later. The Jims are still on the beach after Lapis's victory over Jasper when Steven gets a call from Connie asking about his voicemail from the last two-parter. He's about to explain what happened when Greg returns, asking if Steven's okay and then having a panic attack in his van because his son nearly died. Realizing that telling Connie the truth might just end up hurting her too, he puts off answering the phone until he can come up with the right words to tell her, something he does to a song with the same melody as his ringtone. Steven walks around the city, looking at all of the destruction caused by the battle and the livelihoods lost by the conflict, before surveying the situation from atop a hill where he meets Ronaldo. Ronaldo tells him that Mayor Dewey is calling the people of Beach City back to their homes, while also discussing how difficult it is to keep the truth from other people for their own safety. Ronaldo thinks he's discussing his knowledge of aliens and shape-shifting rocks, unaware he's correct, but Steven just compares this to the fact that the Jims have kept so much about the invasion from him, and the fact that the Crystal Jims are seemingly anomalies of their species. Steven ultimately decides not to tell Connie about what happened for her protection, making the same decision that the Jims made for him now that he understands why it's better to avoid some things you aren't ready for rather than dragging other people into it. But Connie arrives at the temple anyway, asking for Steven, who tries to sneak out. He hides in the crash site, telling Connie that they can't be friends anymore, but Connie refuses to break up over text and continues searching. She eventually finds Steven as he's declaring that they cannot be friends, but his face betrays his true intentions because he doesn't actually want them to stop spending time together. He's only afraid that she might end up hurt if they do. The people of Beach City arrive back in their homes, fully aware that being so close to the temple is dangerous, but not wanting to give up on something they love either. Joyride. Steven and the Crystal Jims are on the beach picking up the remains of the crashed ship, as leaving it lying around is dangerous. Steven is approached by some of the cool kids from Beach City who see how stressed he looks and ask him to hang out with them. He turns them down at first as he has work to do, but that night they come back with pizza and ask him to hang out now that he's done cleaning for the day. They take a joyride outside of Beach City, where each of the kids explains the problems they have with their parents. Sour Cream wants to be a DJ, but his dad is pressuring him to be a fisherman. Buck wants to do his own thing, but his father controls his behavior because he's the mayor's son. And Jenny dislikes the burden of having a twin sister bugging her. Steven opens up about the fact that he's grounded from TV, and also that Earth-conquering aliens were trying to kidnap him because they thought he was his mom, which he sort of is, and also the Crystal Jims might be traitors to their kind and are being hunted down because of this. The cool kids have nothing to say to that, but they do see something glowing in the distance and drive over to investigate. This glowing was caused by Peridot's crashed ship. Steven wants to report its location to the Jims as soon as possible, but the other kids just throw some rocks at it while it lays there. Jenny then offers Steven a chance to take some selfies in front of it, and he agrees, reluctantly at first, but soon he's into it. Literally, he gets into it for a photo, where controls begin to appear, and Steven realizes he can pilot the pod. He then drives it around, racing the others and doing tricks until he accidentally fully closes the pod and it activates its defense systems, lasers blasting all around. The cool kids are afraid of this, but the Crystal Jims, having seen the explosion, investigate and see the pod attacking others. They're prepared to destroy it and even get a few close calls against Steven when Jenny steps in the way and they inform the Crystal Jims Steven is inside. They get him out of the pod and prepare to scold him, but the cool kids intervene again, saying that Steven deserves a chance to relax because he's just a child with far too much weight on his shoulders to bear. The Crystal Jims agree and take a few selfies with Steven in the pod after they unban him from TV. Say Uncle. Steven is unable to summon his shield on command, only managing to produce a bubble around himself. While wishing for a way to perfect his skills, he's approached by the silhouette of his mother rising from the sea, only for this to be revealed as a show by Uncle Grandpa, who's crossing over into Beach City for an episode. Don't worry, none of this is canon. After sinking Lars and Sadie's ship, he proceeds to put Steven's life in danger, only to get the attention of the Crystal Jims, who are watching this stranger point lasers at Steven. Steven manages to defend himself, albeit only with the pummel again rather than the shield as they wanted. Uncle Grandpa introduces himself through a cutaway that is at once a representation of his powers as well as happening literally, which disorients the Jims who decide to chase after Uncle Grandpa for Steven's safety. Steven and Uncle Grandpa escape in a plot hole to the UGRV, where he introduces Pizza Steve, Giant Realistic Flying Tiger, and Mr. Gus. Pizza Steve is upset that there's a second Steven in the RV, but Mr. Gus is excited to meet Steven because he's a big fan of Steven Universe, like the show, even having his own Jimsona. Pizza Steve disguises himself as Pizza Steven to trick the Jims, but only gets eaten by Amethyst, as Pearl becomes more and more neurotic before Garnet just smashes the fourth wall to get back to the beach. There, the Crystal Jims are ready to attack Uncle Grandpa during a tea party, but Steven jumps in the way, finally managing to reduce his shield to defend someone else. Uncle Grandpa recounts Mr. Gus's explanation from before that Steven's powers are based on his mental state, and he's better at defending others than calling forth his powers for no reason. He gives a final good morning before flying off into the sky as he decides who to cross over with next. Love letters. Jamie, Beach City's original mailman, returns after an acting stint in Kansas because he missed being a mailman. While delivering a bunch of brine shrimp to Steven, he sees Garnet emerging from the water, having just returned from a mission to the bottom of the sea to search for lapis. Jamie is immediately smitten with her and runs off to write a love letter which he delivers to Steven the next day. Steven and Connie show Garnet this love letter, composed with flower and language, but because Garnet already is a relationship, not just in one, she dictates a reply telling Jamie no and little else. They try to bring this letter to Jamie as he's sitting by the beach watching the sky, but before they can deliver it, he talks to them about how many acting rejections he faced when traveling, and how one more rejection might be too many. So they hastily rewrite Garnet's letter to be less direct and more in line with his metaphors before delivering. The next day, Jamie arrives back at the temple, having misinterpreted the fake letter from Garnet as affection, and he tries to confess to her in the rain. But Garnet hears this noise and tells him that she never wrote that reply, breaking Jamie's heart. Steven and Connie feel bad about what they did, but assume he'll be better in the morning, until a different postal worker delivers the mail that morning, saying how depressed Jamie looks. They go back to his beach-sitting spot to comfort him, with Garnet joining them to tell Jamie that relationships are built on trust and intimacy, so love at first sight like he felt is a myth. Reformed. Steven is trying to get others to take the "Which crying breakfast friend are you?" quiz, though Pearl and Greg are too busy fixing up the van to take it. So he goes inside and shows it to Amethyst, who proceeds to answer every question either sarcastically or by asking Steven what he thinks the right answer is. Then she sees Garnet inside of her room and they run in after her, where Garnet explains there is a slinker in her trash and Garnet keeps following it through tunnels that it's digging. Garnet keeps knocking over trash piles during the fight, with Amethyst getting upset over her things being pushed around until she is grabbed by the corrupted gem and poofed. Steven is distraught, but Garnet assures him that Amethyst never stays gone for long, and very soon she's back to normal, only with feet instead of hands. Garnet chastises Amethyst for coming back too quickly instead of taking her time to reform, but Amethyst ignores her to continue chasing after the slinker until it grabs her again in one of the tunnels. Amethyst reforms again, this time a shape that more closely resembles Pearl, which she plays off by doing an impression of her. Garnet gets upset as her newer forms are less battle-ready, then Amethyst gets poofed again, coming back with one beefy trogdor arm. She begins to fight the slinker, but cannot maintain this form and practically deflates during the fight, getting poofed one more time. Steven takes her gem back to the temple, delaying their search for the corrupted gem to give her time to regenerate, as Steven wonders why she doesn't do anything for herself. Her last 3 forms were all things people were asking of her, whether it was coming back too quickly for Steven, looking more like Pearl when Garnet wanted her to act more like Pearl, or returning strong but out of control after being called weak. Ultimately, Amethyst does manage to reform after a few hours in a form more similar to her old appearance, just with a few changes that she decided on herself though. Sworn to the Sword. Steven and Connie are having a jam session on the temple, both in that they are playing their instruments together and also sharing jam. Seagulls try to steal Steven's bread, but Connie fends them off by swinging her bow around, which gives Steven the idea that Connie ought to take sword lessons because she wielded Rose's sword before. Pearl's at first hesitant to train Connie, but comes around to the idea when she hears her say that Earth is her home too, and she's tired of being a bystander during the fights. They head to the Sky Temple where Pearl begins Connie's training, though Steven's a bit nervous when he sees the Hollow Pearl and tries to protect her in a bubble before leaving to observe from a distance. Pearl sings the song Do It For Her, about the responsibility of a knight to protect their liege during a training montage, but through the lyrics it's clear that Pearl's singing less about Steven and more about rose quartz. Steven is at first supportive of Connie's sword training, but the more of it he sees, the more he realizes how much danger there is should she fight. And he raises these concerns to Garnet and Amethyst, who describe how Pearl used to constantly sacrifice herself for rose quartz during battles of the past. Steven is concerned that Pearl will push Connie too hard, especially after he watches a training battle where Connie is parroting mantras about how she's nothing without the person she has to protect, and Steven fears she might end up trying too hard to sacrifice herself. He dives into a cloud of fog produced by Pearl, where Connie saves him from a hollow pearl and Steven saves her from a different one. The two declare that they're a team, and that one person is not more important than the other, and Pearl begins to scold them by saying that Steven's life is too valuable to risk, although she accidentally calls Steven by Rose's name during the lecture. They realize that Pearl's harsh training for Connie is just a front to feel better about risking everything to protect Rose, just to lose her anyway. But she realizes this too, and comes around to the idea of both of her pupils working together, just like she and Rose fought together in the past. Rising Tides, Crashing Skies. A mockumentary made by Ronaldo as he investigates the activities of the Crystal Gems in Beach City. It begins with him recapping the events of the previous season's finale from the perspective of an outsider, evacuating the town only to see the giant hand explode a few hours later. He interviews several of the people of Beach City about their experiences with and opinions of the Crystal Gems, but most of them simply acknowledge there's very little that they can do about the weird events going on. So Ronaldo goes to the temple personally to interview Steven, who says the aliens were not after humans, but the gems themselves, and that all of the destruction was both prevented by and caused by their presence. So Ronaldo asks them to leave the city alone, though Pearl points out that the Crystal Temple was there first, but Garnet agrees to pack up and leave, so they return. Later on, Ronaldo is celebrating that the day is saved, when Petey points out that with no crystal gems, there's nothing weird that will happen in the future, which will force Ronaldo to shut down his blog. He returns to the temple to ask the gems to stay, and Garnet agrees because she never actually intended to leave in the first place. The episode ends with the Crystal Gems watching the documentary online and realizing they're the only view the video has. Keeping it together. The gems are folding laundry together, something unusual because the entire chore wheel has become just Pearl overtaking other responsibilities. As they're folding, they discuss the potential plans of Peridot, suspecting that she may return to the kindergarten again to reactivate the facility, and explaining to Steven what goes on there. It's a location where gem shards are placed underground to incubate, and upon growing, begin sapping resources from the planet. They head out to the kindergarten to search the perimeter, where Steven finds Peridot in the middle of drilling into the ground. Pearl and Amethyst chased after her, but Steven and Garnet used the distraction to go back to the underground computer and look up what she was doing, realizing none of the injectors have reactivated, so their initial theory was wrong. They go underground where they see several chunks of dirt removed from the floor, with mutated mixtures of multicolored limbs falling out of them and attacking Garnet and Steven. Garnet freezes up at hearing these mixtures screaming in agony, thinking it's unnatural to force gems to fuse in that way. Garnet explains that fusion is something two gems do to create a form that's greater than the sum of its parts by taking the best traits of each one of the component pieces. Since this is a metaphor for a relationship, the implication behind forced fusions is clear, comparable to the worst aspects of eugenics or even a relationship where one person loses autonomy, as was implied to happen between Lapis and Jasper before. Garnet nearly defuses, but Steven's able to calm her down by shouting her name, enough that she poofs the gems and bubbles them to be safely stored at the temple. In the end, Peridot managed to get away from Amethyst and Pearl by using her detachable hands to fly, and they return the gem shards. The next day, Steven is doing his laundry on the hand from the opening, while discussing fusion with Garnet. There's something to be said for Steven doing a load of laundry on the hand of the temple, an image that's been present since the start of the series during the opening of every episode that only really gets attention called to it now. Here is a location of significance, and here are people doing mundane things on and inside of it. For as much importance as the mission the Crystal Gems perform have, at its core, Steven Universe's message never skips over the mundanity of people's lives surrounding it all. This was the thing that Rose Quartz saw in humanity before, a sentient gem from space falling for Greg, who's just some guy. Not in spite of the fact that he's normal, but because of it. We need to talk. Steven and Connie are dancing to some of Greg's records when they begin to fuse into Stefani for a moment before awkwardly defusing. Greg's amazed, as he was unaware humans and gems could fuse together, but Connie's concerned he might tell her parents that she is involved in magic. Greg agrees to keep it a secret, as he's likely the only other human who gets fusion anyway, and Steven realizes that he's never heard the story of why, so Greg puts on a VHS tape to explain. On this tape, a younger Greg, Rose Quartz, Amethyst, and Garnet are playing for a music video for the song What Can I Do For You? Pearl watches the duet in jealousy, eventually walking over and offering to do a fusion dance with Rose to spice up the video, and they form Rainbow Quartz together. Greg is amazed at this new form, but Pearl tells him that the fact that he cannot fuse with Rose the same way means that they'll never have a real relationship, with Pearl saying that Greg's just a phase for her, due to the short lifespan of humans. So Greg decides that he is going to fuse with Rose Quartz, watching the video again and again to learn the dance moves Pearl used in the fusion, when Garnet sees him attempting this and hears why. She tells him that to fuse doesn't mean dancing like Rose and Pearl, but dancing like Rose and Greg, so he sets up a different stage for the two of them, trying to woo Rose anew with a different kind of romantic dance. In spite of the way they feel about each other, they still don't fuse, although Garnet still seems convinced that it worked, and Greg finally admits his insecurities about the fact that he's a human and Rose is an alien. Back in the present, Greg finishes up the story by saying that, although they didn't fuse, they did still have a deep conversation, which is the point of the story. He then tells Connie that if she ever needs a human to talk to about being human and around gem stuff, she can ask him anything. Then Steven wonders about the fact that he technically isn't a human either. There's a trend in this episode about matters of identity, specifically in the fact that two people having an identity together leaves out everyone else. The way that Pearl and Rose fuse is something that can never work with Pearl and anyone else. The way that Connie and Greg connect over their adjacency to gem magic is something only they understand. And while this means that every single relationship between two people is unique, it also means that the others who love the participants can never feel what they feel, no matter how hard they try. Pearl can never love Rose the same way that Greg loves her, and Steven will never be loved the way others love each other. There is a loneliness in being unique. Chille Tid. The crystal gems are at sea, manually searching for malachite, the fusion of lapis and jasper. But it's late and Steven needs sleep, so they return home to rest, with Steven encouraging the others to join him by teaching them how to sleep during a slumber party. Garnet leaves and Steven teaches the others to sleep by example, resting his head and dreaming of himself being in an old sitcom where the crystal gems act out bits as he awaits Connie to take him to a dance. But then Lapis shows up at the front door with water coming out of her mouth before Steven wakes up in a panic because of the nightmare. He tries to explain the concept of a dream to the others, specifically that they don't make a lot of sense and describing one is always boring, proven when he causes Pearl and himself to fall asleep while recounting a different one. Steven appears flying through the sky with Dog-Copter, attempting to ask him for an autograph before being eaten by Pearl, who then spits him out faster and into a void. Inside this void is Lapis, who begs Steven to stop bothering her because she needs to focus. Then Steven wakes up to the sound of Amethyst laughing at Pearl's projected dream about her and Rose Quartz surfing until Rose's head turns into Greg's. Steven warns them that he's had 2 dreams featuring Lapis and asks Pearl to describe her dream so he can fall asleep again, this time aware he's in a dream. Steven sees Lapis being held by chains, struggling to keep herself above the surface but getting distracted by Steven's presence. She sinks into the water and Jasper comes out, attacking Steven but being held back again until Lapis runs out of strength and Malachite takes over completely. Steven wakes up as Garnet returns, with Garnet saying they can't do anything about it yet and they ought to rest for real, teaching them by example how to sleep. If fusions represent the relationship between two gems, then it follows that they can be made out of relationships other than love and affection. Lapis and Jasper are fused out of their feelings of hatred, and this hate is the thing keeping them together. As one gives into rage, she loses herself and is controlled by another person, the one who is nothing but anger. Cry for help. Steven's Crying Breakfast Friends show is interrupted by a broadcasted distress beacon from Peridot that has also taken over every other station in town. Realizing the only way she could have gotten the power to make such a strong signal is to have repaired the communications hub from Coach Steven, they ride inside of Lion's Mane to reach it, as the warp pad is still destroyed. Amethyst asks if they can reform Sugarlight to destroy it again, but Garnet recalls the loss of control from back then, and still a little traumatized from the forced fusions before, decides to fuse with Pearl, so they can form an entity with more self-control, Sardonyx, who dresses like a performer. Pearl's excited about this transformation, though not as excited as Sardonyx herself, who proceeds to use a warhammer to carefully disassemble the tower piece by piece. The tower falls quickly and everyone celebrates, except for Amethyst, who watched the entire thing with sadness. The next day, Steven is watching Crying Breakfast Friends again when the signal is once more cut out and Peridot's distress beacon to Yellow Diamond continues. They all return to the communication hub to have Sardonyx put on an encore performance as Amethyst sings Tower of Mistakes about how she used to enjoy the feeling of strength that came with being a part of Sugarlight, only to hate watching another fusion go on without her. Realizing that Amethyst feels bad she isn't useful, Steven offers to go on a stakeout with her, so they can catch and defeat Peridot on their own. They wait a while for Peridot to return, only to instead see Pearl climbing up and fixing it, then returning to the temple so that she can convince them to form Sardonyx again. Steven and Amethyst call her out for fixing up the tower just so she can feel the rush of fusing with Garnet again and again, and Garnet yells at her for this manipulation, fusing instead with Amethyst to take out the tower permanently. They return to the temple, though Pearl and Garnet are no longer on speaking terms, as Steven wishes that forgiveness was as easy in real life as it was in Crying Breakfast Friends. Garnet originally chose to fuse with Pearl because she wanted an additional degree of control instead of the impulsiveness that came from Amethyst, but Pearl ended up enjoying the rush of power from Garnet so much that she ignored her better senses to repair the tower and continue fusing. Relationships can be built on lies in this way, even if they do start with purer intentions like knocking down the tower. To trick a person into thinking they need you in their life is a pretty harsh betrayal of trust. And yet Pearl likely did this as she'd been dreaming all season of being useful to Rose Quartz or someone of the ilk again. Not really a justification, just a reason. Keystone Motel. Pearl has spent several days avoiding Garnet after last episode, claiming she's searching for Peridot. Greg enters, saying that he's taking Steven on a road trip to pick up some car wash tunnel brushes he bought online, and he invites anyone else who wants to go along. Garnet volunteers, and the three of them head to the Keystone State, which is not Pennsylvania, to stay at a motel. Once there, Greg leaves to pick up the brushes, as Steven stays with Garnet, who keeps talking to herself about forgiving Pearl before eventually splitting into Ruby and Sapphire. Ruby is hot-headed, literally burning a hole in the ground as she paces around yelling about how furious she was manipulated, but more specifically about how nonchalant Sapphire's acting regarding the fact that she just wants to move past the betrayal. Steven leaves to go to the pool and to talk to Ruby, who is upset at always having to be the bigger gem in every argument, mad because her feelings of anger are not being treated as though they're serious enough to warrant a response. Her heat ends up evaporating the pool, so Steven goes inside with Sapphire, who's been slowly freezing the room as she waits. She explains that Ruby is wasting her time because she's already seen they'll forgive Pearl in the future and they just have to get over it. Greg returns with pizza, and Sapphire says Steven won't like it because it's a square, which he doesn't. But Greg says that one day Steven will appreciate all pizzas, regardless of shape, as he says that giving every gem some space and time and breakfast will make them make up. The next morning they arrive at a diner to eat breakfast, though Ruby and Sapphire are still fighting over whether to immediately forgive Pearl and what it means that they haven't yet. Ruby ends up smashing the table and Steven storms out of the restaurant in anger. The two gems go after him as Steven says he was hoping the road trip would help them to get away from the negative vibes at the temple, only for those vibes to travel with them. then he wonders if it's his fault. Ruby and Sapphire finally realize that, although it isn't Steven's fault, they still hurt him when they argued. Sapphire too focused on the future to care about the present, while Ruby was too focused on the present to care about the future. They make up and refuse as Greg pays for the damaged table and food, before arriving back at the temple. Here, Garnet is still yet to forgive Pearl, but she's at least willing to talk to her now. Onion Friend. Steven is preparing lunch for himself, trying to figure out the last bit of garnish when he sees Onion inside of a cabinet, stealing a bag of chips and running away. Steven chases this kid back to his house, where he enters through a tarp in the garage, only to see a collection of artwork, all featuring Amethyst. So Steven returns to the temple where Amethyst has been sulking due to the ongoing argument between Pearl and Garnet, where he brings her to this garage, only for Vidalia to attempt to chase them off, only to see Amethyst and greet her like an old friend. Vidalia explains that she and Amethyst used to be very close friends prior to having kids, Steven and Sour Cream/Onion, and she invites them in for lunch because Steven's was stolen. She explains a bit about how much her life has changed since getting married, while Amethyst is basically the same as she's always been. They want to keep talking, so they ask Steven to spend some time alone with Onion as they get privacy, with Sour Cream playing loud music in his room by himself. Steven is weirded out by Onion's behavior, like trying to get him to feed a mouse to his pet snake, and watching a video of his birth, before Onion tries to get Steven to crawl into a hidden passageway in the walls. Steven taps out of there and heads back into the living room, where he sees Amethyst and Vidalia talking about how lost Amethyst is, with her other friends all arguing with each other. Vidalia mentions how in the past, Amethyst used to let stuff like this pass over and rarely cared about what was going on around her, and that she even looked up to her for this. Things for Amethyst have changed, though. Vidalia is given credit for also not caring about what's going on around her, which manifests in her family constantly fighting one another as Onion robs people and Sour Cream shuts off the power with the demand for his DJ booth. Amethyst, on the other hand, used to be like her, but is slowly coming around to caring more about her friends, to the point that their issues are her issues too. Realizing how important this conversation is to Amethyst, Steven goes back into Onion's room to tolerate him a bit longer, crawling into the mystery hole and coming out in a shrine of sorts to a chest full of guys. Onion offers Steven one of the rare Gals figurines for spending time with him, and they finally leave, with Amethyst inviting Vidalia and Onion to the temple someday. Historical friction. Jamie shows Steven the script for a play he's putting on about the history of Beach City, funded by Mayor Dewey, with the script also written by Mayor Dewey, and the story about an ancestor of Mayor Dewey who founded Beach City. This story tells about how Captain Dewey was a perfect individual whose crew loved him unconditionally, and also he could grow to 50 feet tall and carry the ship to safety. Jamie dislikes this script because it makes the main character seem too perfect. And Steven also realizes the same thing during a conversation with Pearl, about how people only look up to characters because of the struggles they go through, not their lack of flaws. He even cheers Pearl up a bit by saying that her flaws recently, like the events of Cry for Help, make her into a better person because she's persisting. Pearl points out that she knew Captain Dewey personally, and the story didn't happen that way, offering to rewrite the script to be more historically accurate. Jamie prefers the new version of the script, but he's worried about performing this version because he's convinced they would get their funding pulled from future shows. Steven convinces him it's worth taking the risk because that's what good characters do, and they agree. The new version of the play features a cowardly Captain Dewey who was kicked out of his home country for being disliked and is always messing things up. The Crystal Gems met him at sea and told him to turn around because the way forward was dangerous, but he continued onward anyway, only for the ship to be attacked by a monster. This monster is driven away by a gem resembling the statue behind the temple, and Dewey declares that he is going to settle there anyway because he isn't afraid of risk. Dewey is furious at these changes, but the crowd loves them, cheering for their mayor for his relationship to a relatable hero. Dewey approves more funding for a Beach City community theater, and Steven ends the episode on a joke, because that's what audiences like. Friendship. The Crystal Gems have come up with a way to track Peridot using her escape pod to link her warp signature, ambushing her at a warp hub and preparing to capture her. In spite of Steven knocking her around with a generated shield, Peridot still manages to escape by flying off after Pearl and Garnet run into each other while trying to catch her. They return to the temple, with Pearl immediately trying to get back to work on catching Peridot the next time she warps. But Garnet doesn't respond to this news at all, with Amethyst trying to get them to just talk out their issues, Pearl trying to ignore the tension and assuming that Peridot will end their argument, while Garnet refuses to speak at all. They get a ping with Peridot's location and ignore the argument to head there, the site of an old crashed gem ship they used to use before setting up the warp pads. They anticipate trapping Peridot inside and head in there, only for Peridot to reveal that it was a trap, sealing them inside of the ship and firing a bunch of lasers at them. Steven exhausts himself making yet another shield to protect them as they head further inside for cover, chased by spikes until they finally find a hologram of Peridot that Pearl attacks, before realizing she's been trying so hard to catch the gem, she fell for an obvious trap. The floor opens up, with Amethyst catching Steven before he falls even further, but Pearl and Garnet wind up in a tiny room together as the ceiling shuts on them. Amethyst and Steven try to come up with a way to get them out, but they see on a screen that the two are talking about the issues between them and that this trap might finally get them to stop their argument. The walls begin to close in on them, figuratively and literally pushing them together, as Pearl confesses that she only ever wanted to fuse because she feels useless without some kind of strength. But Garnet reveals that she literally fell apart from the incident, and that she has flaws she simply covers up to protect the others due to her status as leader. With this, the two finally realize that the only way to escape is with the fusion, and this time Pearl asks for explicit permission before they form sardonyx and burst out of the floor. The crystal gems work together to make a chain to catch Peridot before she can fly off, but she simply ejects her foot to make an escape, with the gems saying they'll get more of her next time. Nightmare Hospital. Steven and Connie return from another sword practice, with Connie wishing she could practice more on her own. So Steven offers her his mother's sword to continue improving, only for Miss Maheswaran to return home from the hospital at that moment, discovering this poorly hidden sword in the living room. She confiscates it because she doesn't want her daughter playing with swords, then gets called back to work, leaving with it. Steven and Connie follow her to work, riding Lion there so they can try and negotiate for its return by changing Miss Maheswaran's mind. They watch her enter the building and begin working on a patient they found on the side of the road, trying to take its vitals but finding nothing. She then catches Steven and Connie in the middle of trying to take the sword and is furious that her daughter won't listen to her. But before Steven and Connie can explain, they get attacked by a gem cluster full of way too many limbs. Worse is that the patient they're in the room with is also a cluster, and it starts attacking them as well. Steven holds off the monster with a shield as Connie tries to get the sword from her mom, but Miss Maheswaran refuses to hand it over, saying that she knows better than to let her daughter wield a weapon. They try to flee but are surrounded, with Steven forming a bubble around the three of them for protection. Here, Connie finally tells her mother that her glasses are fake, and they've been fake for a year. Miss Maheswaran realizes that she doesn't know her daughter as well as she thinks she does, and Steven drops the bubble as Connie poofs both clusters with ease, while Steven bubbles them back to the temple. Outside the hospital, they talk about how Connie's mother was only enforcing so many rules to protect her daughter, but you can't really protect a child if the child doesn't feel comfortable telling you the truth about themselves. Steven sees the scene between the mother and child and holds onto the sword, lamenting that his mother's not there. Sadie's Song. Steven is handing out flyers for the Beach-a-Palooza when he hears Sadie singing while restocking the bag of Big Donut. Amazed that she can sing so well, Steven suggests that she sign up for the Beach-a-Palooza to sing there, as everyone else in town is doing it too. And although she's hesitant to sing in front of others at first, she comes around to the idea and invites Steven to her house to work on a routine. But as they're planning things, Sadie's mother comes home and learns from Steven what they're up to, offering her help as well as the two raid Sadie's closet to look through all her old outfits and hobbies. Steven and Sadie's mom then work together on a makeover for Sadie through a montage of making her practice dancing in anticipation of the big night. But before she officially signs up, Sadie says she would rather not have her name on the list, something Steven interprets as signing her up as a mystery guest. The night of the Beach-a-Palooza comes, and most of the town puts on various acts, from miming to stand-up to a conspiracy rant, but when it's time for Sadie to go on stage as the big mystery guest, she gets more and more nervous before eventually dunking her head in the water and washing off the makeup. She says she never wanted to perform as a mystery guest, and her mother's too enthusiastic about being supportive to the point of taking over all of her interests, that she can't even point out something fun without it being a big deal. Because there's still a big mystery guest who has to perform, Steven goes out and sings Sadie's song for her, and the next day Sadie returns to singing casually. Catch and release. Steven is grabbed out of his bedroom by Peridot, who takes him to the warp hub to repair it so she can get off of Earth. He agrees to fix it for her, but his spit doesn't do anything, and the pad remains busted. Peridot breaks down, saying that kidnapping Steven was her last plan to escape, and now she's out of options, and short one foot. Then the Crystal Gems, after Steven, arrive at the hub to rescue him and fight Peridot one more time, this time even managing to grab her, though not before she starts shouting something about what she knows. Garnet dismisses her words as desperation as Amethyst tosses her limbs into the water, and they return to the temple with Peridot finally bubbled away. But Steven's unsure about the fact that they bubbled Peridot before she could finish talking, so he goes to the basement to find her bubble and free her. Peridot's at first terrified that she's going to be harvested and attempts to fight back, only to realize that all her weapons and limb extenders are gone. Instead of fighting, she explains why she was sent to Earth in the first place, checking up on the cluster, which will soon destroy everything, something that was supposed to be a quick mission. She then slap fights with Steven before escaping, running away and straight into the temple where the other gems quickly start to fight her, but Steven stops them from attacking, giving Peridot enough time to barricade herself in the bathroom. They realize that she does have useful information and they cannot simply bubble her again, so they reluctantly allow Peridot to stay in the bathroom until she cooperates. Steven's able to bribe his way inside by returning her foot, and for a while the two are able to talk somewhat normally about what life is like on Earth. Steven, as usual, has an innocent demeanor to him that drops the guard of a lot of the enemies the Crystal Gems face. When you approach someone with a weapon drawn, they're far less likely to cooperate than they are to defend themselves. Steven always tries to talk first and only uses his powers to defend himself, the shield representing that. And as such, he tends to get a lot more information out of people than the other Crystal Gems do. The gems tend to assume they know everything they need to know, but Steven doesn't know these things and tends to learn a lot of uncomfortable truths as a result, though it's better to know of danger before it comes than to be taken off guard. When it rains. Peridot is still barricaded inside of the bathroom, with the Crystal Gems failing to get her to crack and telling them everything she knows about the cluster. They need to leave on a mission, so they leave Steven behind to watch after her, giving a quick goodbye before leaving the two alone. Steven begins making soup as a rainstorm comes in, and when lightning strikes, Peridot rushes out of the bathroom, fearful that the cluster has arrived. Steven explains that the noise was just lightning, and then he uses the evaporation from his soup to explain how rain clouds work. Peridot laments that she doesn't know anything now that her limb extensions are gone because they contain screens that would have taught her this. Steven invites Peridot out into the rain to show her it's harmless, trying to use first-hand experience to show her the Earth rather than having her learn about it through a screen. After they head back inside, Peridot agrees to show Steven the information she knows about the cluster by taking him directly to the kindergarten, so he too gets to have first-hand experience of what's really underneath the Earth. This is revealed as a project that Homeworld began work on after the Rebellion, a giant forced fusion similar to the corruptions they've been fighting before, and that once it's fully grown, it'll burst out of the ground, destroying the planet. But Peridot is confident, saying that Steven's knowledge of Earth might be enough to save it, but Steven admits he has limited knowledge and mostly learns things from his dad. Then they get attacked by some fusions, with Steven unable to do anything but make a bubble, while Peridot can't do anything at all without her tools. They wind up cornered when the Crystal Gems arrive and save the two, chastising Steven for letting Peridot out. But Peridot's internalized Steven's message by this point, that it's impossible for them to save the Earth alone and they need the help of other people. So just like the Crystal Gems helped fight for Steven and Peridot, Peridot agrees to tell them what she knows, so they can fight together again. Back to the barn. Peridot teaches the others about the cluster, a giant fusion at the center of the Earth that could take form any moment, destroying the planet while it does so. Pearl suggests that they build a giant drill to confront it at the center of the Earth, but Peridot dismisses this plan, instead suggesting that they build a giant drill to confront it at the center of the Earth. She breaks Steven's TV looking for parts for the machine, but he suggests they go to the barn to get materials instead. Upon arriving, Pearl draws up an idea for the drill that they'll create, but Peridot dismisses this idea, saying that a Pearl is incapable of coming up with anything good, as they're just meant to serve others. As it turns out, Pearls are mass-produced servants to other gems, kept more like accessories than as a real being. This ties into how Pearl has felt lost without Jones-Qaurtey around. She was literally built to serve others, and with no one to serve but herself, has no actual purpose but what she makes. Steven suggests that Peridot and Pearl have a robot building contest to see who the better designer is, with the winner leading the project. They both quickly assemble robots that fit their design philosophies, Pearl making a slim, graceful robot, while Peridot makes something tougher and stronger. They make a series of arbitrary competitions that Steven judges, ultimately winding up after a montage in a tie. Pearl accepts this outcome and agrees to cooperate equally, but Peridot refuses, challenging her to a fight as a tiebreaker. The other crystal gems cheer on Pearl, but she ends up getting overpowered and losing the fight. Peridot begins to celebrate, but no one celebrates with her. Instead, they congratulate Pearl for a job well done because there are things more important than winning. Peridot gets to lead the construction, but would have to do it alone, and save for her attempts at the end of the episode to join in with the congratulations and make her peace with the others. Too far. The crystal gems have begun work on their drill, with Peridot begrudgingly allowing Pearl to lead the design team for its head. Peridot tries to convince Garnet to defuse and is leased to a fence post as a result, struggling to do any work until Steven and Amethyst approach after failing to assist Pearl due to their lack of technical knowledge. When Peridot suggests that they use one of the injectors from the kindergarten as the drill bit, the three of them are sent away on that mission, partially to keep an eye on Peridot while she's away. Once there, Peridot realizes that Amethyst considers her lack of knowledge about Earth and the names of things to be funny, as well as the fact that she is talented at making fun of others. Peridot makes fun of Garnet for always being fused even outside of combat, and she makes fun of Pearl for being a servant with no one to serve, and she makes fun of Steven for having a human half. But when she turns to make fun of Amethyst, she touches on her insecurity at coming from the kindergarten, specifically the fact that Amethyst is too small to be a quartz due to her hole being too low to the ground and too small to have been released at the right time. Amethyst is upset at these jokes and wraps up the mission, with Peridot not understanding why Amethyst is no longer talking to her. They continue working on the drill when Peridot accidentally activates it early, rushing towards an unaware Amethyst. She rescues Amethyst and Steven's able to disable the drill, later approaching her happy she is safe. Steven then encourages Peridot to apologize, something she's unable to do directly, having to use a pre-recorded log instead, where she admits that she is new to Earth and doesn't understand social graces enough to avoid saying hurtful things. The answer. It is midnight on Steven's birthday, and Garnet agrees to finally tell him that she's a fusion, which he already knows. But she also intends to tell him the story of how Sapphire and Ruby met, which he doesn't. This story begins on Earth 5,750 years ago, while a group of rebels, the Crystal Gems, were actively hindering the colonization efforts of Earth. They dispatched Sapphire as a diplomat to the planet, as well as 3 Ruby bodyguards who can fuse into a larger Ruby. Sapphire predicts that the rebels will attack them, poof several gems, and then be captured. As predicted, the rebels arrive, Jones-Qaurtey and Pearl, and they proceed to fight exactly as Sapphire predicted. But what Sapphire did not predict was a Ruby jumping in the way, tackling her to safety, and then the two fusing together. The court is appalled by this, as it's considered not only wrong for 2 gems of different types to fuse, but the fact that a lowly Ruby was even interacting directly with a member of the Royal Court of Blue Diamond in the first place. Between this and previous episodes revealing the prejudice Peridot had towards pearls, Blue Diamond even has a pearl of her own, and the pearl we see is referred to as roses, there are underlying class structures to gem society. The fact that this is a surprise to the viewers means that this is a class structure that has ceased to exist on Earth. Pink Diamond even recognizes this, and calls off the attack when she sees the newly formed Garnet, another thing Sapphire couldn't predict. Sapphire and Ruby are yelled at by the gathered crowd of gems, so they leap down to Earth to escape. Something the episode does here that's neat is changing the art style of the flashback from crude outlines of gyms and geometry to a more lush and vivid environment, as if nothing before that moment was worth remembering well. Sapphire is amazed that she can't predict the future with Ruby, while Ruby is impressed that Sapphire would continue a mission even at the cost of her own life. They spend more time on Earth, singing Something Entirely New, which reuses bits of melody from Stronger Than You, before fusing once again. After fusing, Garnet meets with Rose Quartz, who seems to be more interested in this new fusion than herself, and Garnet joins with the rebellion because her love is accepted there. Steven's birthday. It's Steven's birthday party, and the Crystal Gems minus Peridot have taken a break from construction to help him celebrate. Greg arrives with Connie to officially start the party with several of the same traditions they've always had. But as Greg is reminiscing on Steven's past birthdays, he realizes that his son hasn't really grown in several years. He and Connie have another human talk in private about how Steven might not grow the same way as the rest of them because he's part gem. But Steven overhears this conversation and begins to feel self-conscious about the fact that he's so short and might be that way forever. So before the party begins in earnest, he uses a moment of privacy to force himself to grow a bit, like he did back in Too Many Birthdays, now becoming a proper adolescent. Steven's physical appearance reflects his mental state just as much as the rest of his powers do, and he isn't alone in this, as we saw Amethyst recreating herself in the past based on the expectations people had for her. Steven's never really been expected to grow up, as the gems have kept things from him for so long while he's been living with them, and only recently has he ever really been expected to hold his own due to instances like the cluster and arrival of Peridot and Jasper forcing him to grow up. So in his mind, he's a child, and so he looks like one. But now that there's this expectation that he should have grown older, the last few years of coasting along are called into question. Of course, growing up suddenly has a few issues, not just small ones like not fitting into the gifts Connie gave him, but the fact that holding his appearance as an older person is something he has to consciously do. Amethyst and Greg catch him shrinking back to his normal size, and Amethyst warns him about the dangers of maintaining a form that isn't his true one. A metaphor not just for gem powers, but anybody trying to lie about who they are. Gem powers are a metaphor for a person's mental state, and here, the metaphor is reversed. Steven spends so much energy pretending to be somebody that he's not, he ends up overcorrecting and exhaustion, reverting to the form of a baby and ending the party. Greg takes Steven for a drive, as that's what used to calm him down when he was a baby before, but Connie insists on coming along on this drive as she still wants to be there for Steven, whether he's a baby, or a child, or an awkward teen. They return to the barn where Steven finally takes on a comfortable form, not as short as he was before, but still noticeably older. He is at last a combination of what he thinks of himself and how others view him, but more importantly, he's still Steven, who he was all along. It could have been great. The gems are relaxing, enjoying the view after a long day of construction on the drill. Peridot's confused as to why they aren't continuing to work, viewing their time staring at the sunset as wasted, since they could have been productive. Steven tries to convince her that life isn't about productivity, but about taking time to appreciate small things as well. And soon, Peridot is singing along to Peace and Love on Planet Earth. She makes up her own lyrics about how the crystal gems are all crazy, but she feels the same way and is glad they're working together. Soon, the drill is completed, and the only thing needed to finish the mission are the exact coordinates of the cluster. Pearl suggests that they could find the locations on a terminal located on the moon, so Steven asks Lion to portal them there, which he does at great strain. After playing around with low gravity that only affects him, Steven and the others inspect the inscriptions on the wall. As Peridot excitedly explains, they're images of the diamonds, the leaders of the gems that they were made to serve, though the rest of the crystal gems understandably don't like this explanation, as they don't serve anyone anymore. They make their way to the top of the spire, where Peridot's upset at the lack of respect they're showing for the artifacts up there, saying they're not high-ranking enough to touch anything, though eventually coming around to sitting on the throne when Steven invites her up. Peridot pulls up the schematics of the Earth, discovering the exact location of the cluster, while also showing what exactly the original plans for the planet were, a colony of gems where they could expand the Empire. Peridot excitedly shows off the potential of the planet, though the gems hate the idea as it means all other life on Earth is eliminated, something Peridot doesn't really understand. This mimics her mentality at the start of the episode. Peridot doesn't get why the others are sitting around watching the sunset instead of working, and she doesn't get why they wouldn't want their planet turned into a giant factory for gym kind. The purpose of life to the homeworld gyms is to expand and exploit, while the purpose of life to the gyms of Earth is to enjoy and thrive in their time. They've been defending the Earth not because the planet has a bunch of resources, but because it represents something greater, the idea that we're not just meant to survive, but to thrive. Message received. Steven confronts Peridot about the fact that she took a diamond-shaped device from the Spire in the previous episode, asking her a bit about the diamonds and her loyalty to them. Peridot fawns over Yellow Diamond, saying that she's loyal to her because of the diamond's superiority. So Steven takes the device from her and locks her inside of a car in the barn. He takes the device to the crystal gems, identified as a communicator that Peridot wanted to use to contact Homeworld. They're appalled by this, but Steven's hurt most of all. He extended his trust to Peridot even though she was an enemy, believing that there was some good deep down in each person. The other gems merely compare Steven to his mother, someone who also saw the best in everybody and always tried to extend them help and trust. Garnet explains that not everyone is deserving of this trust, but it's still the right thing to do to give them kindness anyway, because the alternative just means hating strangers. Peridot escapes from a captivity inside of the robot from back to the barn, grabbing the diamond communicator and running away while trying to activate it. The crystal gems tell Steven to pout later as they chase her down to prevent contact with Homeworld by hopping into an amethyst helicopter. They catch up to Peridot and shut off the robot, though she escapes through the arm and activates the communicator, finally getting to speak directly with Yellow Diamond. The gems hide from sight so as not to be discovered. Yellow Diamond is at first dismissive of Peridot, chastising her for crashing the ship and being behind schedule, though she's at least pleased that the cluster is on schedule. But then Peridot explains that she doesn't think the Earth is worth destroying, that there are unique things on the planet that shouldn't be destroyed for just another colony. Yellow Diamond refuses to hear this out, telling Peridot to obey authority, to which Peridot calls her a clod who doesn't know anything about the planet she wants to destroy. Yellow Diamond detonates the communicator, which Steven bubbles as Garnet punches it to a safe distance, and as they sit beneath the explosion, they welcome Peridot not as a traitor to the homeworld, but as a crystal gem. Through the last season, Peridot is frequently seen that all of the things she is told are normal on Homeworld are different on Earth. The Pearl is an independent thinker, fusions can be made in any way that's comfortable, and they sit back and enjoy life instead of mindlessly serving their superiors. Her life on Earth has been more enjoyable than a life of servitude to a group of matriarchs, and getting to experience what she left once again has made her realize the difference between surviving and thriving. She stands up for herself, for her right to stand up for herself. The first of many things she gets to do instead of has to do. Log date 7152. Peridot is breaking down over the fact that she told off Yellow Diamond, panicking because she's a traitor, but also excited to be a crystal gem, while also not understanding what the future will hold. She records her thoughts in a tape recorder Steven gave to her, but as she can't deal with it at the moment, she gets rid of the recorder to be elsewhere. Out of curiosity, Steven takes this tape recorder and listens to Peridot's various logs, starting a while ago as she attempts to understand the creatures on Earth, not making much of a differentiation between the humans and bugs, until Garnet lectures her to be more careful. She experiments a bit with Earth accessories like a pair of shorts and paint can leg extenders Steven gave to her, not really understanding the purpose of these things. She learns a bit about culture, trying to read off jokes from a book, as well as watching TV shows Steven shows her and getting involved in shipping discourse. She still doesn't understand anything about Earth, least of all does she understand anything about the gems, as Amethyst uses her shape-shifting powers to make jokes, and Garnet is fused all the time for no reason, until Amethyst shapeshifts into a chicken, which makes her get the joke about the chicken crossing the road, and then Garnet's permanent fusion is compared to Peridot's favorite chip. In the end, Garnet helps Peridot record one last entry, asking Steven to give the recording device back to her because she'll probably want it again. Peridot wants to defend Earth as she proved last episode. The issue she has though is that she doesn't really know why she wants to defend Earth. This episode is about her learning the why of her actions after the fact. Mostly it's about her seeing the gems wasting time and effort towards things that are not directly efficient or productive. Amethyst is wasting energy transforming herself, and yet Peridot never really asks how that energy should better be used. After all, she spent the entire season putting all her energy into destroying the planet she now loves, so she can't really judge others for how they spend their time. She wonders why Garnet is spending time fused if she isn't doing anything, because to the gems of Homeworld, fusion is something done out of function or necessity. But Garnet points out that she has a good reason to be fused. She enjoys doing it. Amethyst isn't wasting her energy by transforming because she likes being transformed and can do bits with it. This episode is the conclusion of Season 2, and it doesn't really wrap up the cluster storyline so much as it wraps up the storyline for Peridot. A story about her discovering that the purpose of life is not to blindly obey orders in the interest of being efficient, but to spend your time helping others and having a good time while doing so.